What if I told you the world's most famous sandwich exists because a man in a hurry couldn't wait for a fork? Billions of hamburgers are eaten every single year. It's on menus from gas stations to five-star restaurants. Kids draw it before they can spell it. It's arguably the most recognizable food on planet Earth. But almost nobody knows where it actually came from. Not a factory. Not a fast food chain. Not a marketing campaign. A tiny wooden lunch wagon, parked on a cobblestone street, run by an immigrant nobody had ever heard of. But the real story is far stranger. Picture it. A short, unglamorous stretch of street in a Connecticut factory town. The year is 1895. Steam rises from smokestacks. Workers pour out of iron foundries and carriage shops, hungry, exhausted, with almost no time to eat. Into this world rolls a small food cart. Behind it stands a young Danish immigrant named Lassen. He's not trying to invent anything. He just wants to feed hungry workers a hot, cheap meal before their break ends. His menu is simple. Steak sandwiches. Scraps of beef, trimmed down, grilled fast, and handed over the counter. Nobody in that crowd could have guessed that this humble cart would one day be called, by the Library of Congress itself, the birthplace of the hamburger. But first, there had to be a problem. And problems, as always, arrive without warning. Factory towns like this one ran on speed. Workers didn't get long lunches. They got minutes. Every second a customer spent fumbling with a knife and fork was a second they couldn't afford to lose. Lassen watched this every day. Hungry men and women, staring at their pocket watches, trying to eat fast enough to get back before the whistle blew. A sandwich solved the speed problem for bread and cheese. But a hot, juicy steak sandwich? That was messy. That required cutlery. That required time nobody had. So the real question wasn't, how do we make food taste good? It was something much harder. How do you serve a hot meal that a person can eat while running? Then, one afternoon in 1900, everything changed in a single moment. A customer burst through the door of the lunch wagon. He was in a desperate hurry, the story goes, practically begging for something quick and delicious that he could eat on the move. There was no time for a plate. No time for silverware. No time to slice a proper steak sandwich the usual way. So Lassen made a decision that, on paper, looks almost too simple to matter. He took ground beef trimmings, the kind normally reserved for his steak sandwiches, broiled them fast on a blistering cast-iron grill, and instead of serving them the traditional way, he slid the sizzling patty between two slices of toasted bread. No fork. No knife. No plate required. He handed it across the counter, and the rushed customer walked out the door eating history without realizing it. It sounds almost too small to be a turning point. A patty. Some bread. That's it. But this was not luck. This was the answer to a problem nobody else had bothered to solve. While other vendors were serving loose, Hamburg steak, on plates with gravy, Lassen had accidentally created something new, a meal you could hold in one hand and eat while walking. He had just built, without knowing it, the blueprint for an entire industry. And yet, almost nothing happened. There was no headline. No celebration. No crowd gathering outside the wagon to witness a historic event. To the people of that Connecticut street, it was just lunch. A clever little trick for busy factory workers, nothing more. For years, this sandwich stayed almost completely local. It didn't have a name that mattered. It didn't have a following outside that one street corner. While Lassen's small business grew steadily and loyally, most of the country had never heard of it and had no idea a new kind of food had just quietly been born. Meanwhile, out in the Midwest, other cooks and street vendors were experimenting with their own versions of ground beef sandwiches, completely unaware of each other, completely unaware that their small-town creations were converging toward the same idea. The truth is messier than most origin stories admit. There were rival vendors, rival cities, rival claims. Even today, historians argue about who truly deserves the title. But something was coming that would change all of that. The turning point didn't arrive as a single dramatic event. It arrived as a slow shift in American life itself. Cities were growing. Factory work was speeding up. Fairs and expositions were drawing enormous crowds hungry for novelty. And in the middle of all this, the idea of a ground beef sandwich, served fast, served cheap, served without ceremony, started popping up again and again across the country. By the early 1900s, this humble creation had a name that stuck: the hamburger. And slowly, businesses realized something powerful. This wasn't just a quick meal. It was the perfect food for a nation obsessed with speed. Restaurants built entirely around it began to appear. Chains formed. Recipes were standardized. What started as one man's improvised fix for an impatient customer became the foundation of an entirely new category of food. Back at that same small storefront, the Lassen family kept doing exactly what they'd always done. Same grill. Same bread. Same recipe passed down through generations. And decades later, in the year 2000, the United States government itself weighed in. Backed by a Connecticut congresswoman, the Library of Congress formally recognized that little lunch wagon as the birthplace of the American hamburger. An improvised fix for one impatient customer had just been declared, on the historical record, the origin of one of the most powerful food industries on Earth. Today, walk into almost any city on the planet, and you'll find a version of that same idea. Ground beef. Bread. Speed. It's been reinvented 1,000 times, wrapped in different names, served in different styles, but the core concept has never changed. It fed a booming industrial economy that needed workers back on the factory floor in minutes, not hours. It fed a car culture built on drive-thru windows. It fed a fast-paced modern world that never seemed to have enough time to sit down and eat. Billions of hamburgers are sold every single year now. Entire global corporations were built on this one deceptively simple idea. And it all traces back to a rushed decision made under pressure, in a small wooden wagon, by a man who was just trying to help one hungry customer make it back to work on time. The next time you hold a hamburger in your hands, think about what's really in front of you. Not just a meal. Years of small, unnoticed experiments. One impatient customer with nowhere to sit. And a quiet decision, made in seconds, that would end up feeding the entire world.